Hi, my name is J.L. Hancock. I'm the author of the Hawk Enigma. There you go. And the best advice I was ever given was from my childhood martial arts instructor, and he told me, learn how to be an egotist, but don't be egotistical.
Ooh, that's new advice, Jim. So be an egoist, but don't be egotistical. Explain that, man. That's fascinating.
Sure. So originally the premise was in a martial arts setting, but you can apply it to anything in life, right? And we begin to think, a lot of times we think of an ego as something that's bad, but in reality, an ego is an understanding of your own personal self-worth. It's your self-esteem. It's how you understand the value of yourself. However, if you don't have a value of yourself, it can be an issue, correct? But so an egotist is an individual that understands not only that they have to understand their own self-worth, but their reputation and how other people value their worth is also an important aspect to take into consideration. So an egotist is always looking at those variables, how they see themselves and how they see other people and how other people see them. But an individual who's egotistical is somebody who is constantly chasing after their own reputation and they're never quite catching up. So in the context of like a martial arts setting, it was right before you step into the ring. What does your opponent know of you? What do they think you can do? And how are you going to surprise them? But you can apply that to pretty much anything. You can apply it to business. You can apply it to any interaction you have in daily life. How much do other people understand about you? How much do you want them to understand? And how much do you not understand? And whereas an egotistical person on the opposite end of that spectrum, their reputation has kind of gotten away from them and they're not able to keep up with it. And it leads to things like imposter syndrome, arrogance. It leads to mistakes. It also can lead to a lot of hubris. And so really it's a matter of finding that balance between humility, like destructive humility in the sense to where you don't have enough confidence, and then the other element of being overconfident in pretty much anything you do.
Wow. And how old were you when you learned that?
I thought me that was 12. That's when I
Holy
first started
crap,
teaching that.
dude.
Yeah.
That's pretty. So how long did it take you to really embrace that though? Because that's a powerful lesson, man, to learn at 12 years old, huh?
Well, with martial arts, it was an easy thing to understand because you were constantly being underestimated, and that was nice. You always wanted to be in that position where the opponent thought less of you than when you got in the ring. But as you get better, you're constantly having to become better yourself, right? And so it became motivation to just constantly grow and develop as not just as an individual, but a martial artist, but as an individual as well.
That's cool, man. I've never heard that. That's a great suggestion for all of us, man, to really do that, and that'll help us grow and be an egotist, not egotistical. I dig that, man. So moving from that, I mean, you went in the Navy pretty young, right?
Well, I was 22 actually, so not
Okay,
super young.
that's still pretty young. 22. I mean, you're not a
Yeah,
baby, right? But you're
yeah.
certainly. I mean, 22 is still pretty young. So, we're. I mean, that's 10 years of martial arts you got there. Did you go in right away as as a linguist, or did that take some time here? And then let's talk about your movement into working with the SEALs a little bit. Uh oh, Jim, do you hear me, brother? Uh oh, either I'm out or you're out. One of the two. Let's see. Uh-oh, well, Jim dropped out here, and here he is back. All right, let's try this again.
Sorry about that.
Dude,
Sorry about that.
no, that's okay. That's funny. That's really funny. So talk to me about your journey into the Navy. Like, why'd you join the Navy? How did that come about, man? Because at 22, like I was saying, right, you're not old, but you're certainly not like right out of high school, fresh faced.
Right. So I joined the military.
Because of 9/11. I had just come back from Japan.
And you're back.
Sorry, man. Dude. Okay, that should be the end. We should be good.
Good. So yeah, so
Okay.
you just came back from Japan because of
Right.
9/11. Yep, keep going.
Yeah, so because of 9/11, actually, I'd never considered joining the military before. It only happened because my best friend was like, hey, I want to take you down to the recruiter. I want to go to the recruiters. You ought to come with me. There's this place called the Defense Language Institute. You can go and learn another language. I already knew Japanese, and so I was like, why don't I go learn, see if they can see what they have to offer. But to be honest, I didn't think super highly of the military. I didn't think it was something that it was good for me. It was, I wanted to keep my freedom. I wanted to go be a river guide and go mess around on Colorado and do all that. And then 9/11 happened, and my motivation changed. I honestly felt that was my generation's call to arms. And having had both my grandfathers who fought in World War II, I just felt that it was something I had to do. That really, yeah.
Wow. That's admirable, dude. That's cool. That's cool. So
Thanks.
yeah, so you did that. Yeah, for sure. So the language thing, that was the interest. So you knew Japanese from martial arts, or how'd you learn Japanese, man?
I was a missionary in Japan for 2 years, and they put me. I lived in Hiroshima, Japan, as well as Okayama, and then the island of Shikoku. And so I just spoke Japanese every day for 2 years, and then came back, and I still loved Asian languages, and I wanted to learn more and do more with them. And so I found out about the Defense Language Institute, and they sent me there. And I was like, hey, I want to learn Chinese. I can already kind of read it. It's going to be great. And they were like, hey, the strange justification they gave is they said, well, you're overqualified for Chinese, which I don't think such a thing exists. That was their way of saying, hey, we need to put somebody in the Korean program because at the time, with the new test they'd created, it had a 5% pass rate. And so the attrition was terrible at that school. So they put me in Korean. So I learned Korean it took me, there was a big influx after 9/11. So I had to wait 9 months for my class to start. And then it was 16 months of training after that to finish the Korean program, because it's considered what's called a Category 4 language. Cat 4 languages take 16 months. So other Cat 4 languages are Arabic, Chinese, Thai, Japanese, and then Korean. And then I ended up in Hawaii for 3 years after that, before screening to get into naval special warfare.
Wow. So 2 years of schooling, basically, right? 3 years in Hawaii, and then special warfare. Come on, man. Linguists don't do special warfare. Like, what do you cut people with your tongue? I mean, how does this work, Tim? You gotta talk to me.
Hopefully not. So there's actually a long history inside of it. It was originally called a program back in the day. It was a cryptologic support program where they had cryptologists that would regionally align with the different mission sets that were taking place. So if you were a Korean linguist, for example, you would translate for, at the time, the Republic of Korea SEALs, and then you would help the American SEALs interact with them. But the other thing about being a linguist is you're also a cryptologist, and so you have to have an understanding of radio frequency theory and RF propagation. And so that effectively became the baseline skill set that they needed. At the time, there was a large need for people that can understand that type of intelligence, really how to exploit radio waves. And that became how I ended up inside of the special operations community for years.
Cool.
In the bulk of my career, actually.
Cool. So you were crypto before crypto was cool, huh?
I don't know if crypto's ever been going to be cool, but honestly, I think, well, to those of us who do it, it's cool. But those of us on the outside are like, it doesn't sound cool, but it really is, actually. Yeah, I love being a cryptologist.
Cool, man. Yeah. And for those who don't know that are listening or watching, 20 years before Jim was in crypto, I was in crypto. So hence the little bit of teasing there. So I wasn't a linguist though. So yeah,
but you're a different flavor, right? You did the,
different flavor. Yeah, I delivered the email. You actually listened to the radio, so a little bit of difference there
at the time, and then later on it just turned into looking at beeps and boops, So
yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely, man. So special warfare, right? I mean, that's some of the cool stuff about here, right? These are some special warriors inside the Hawk Enigma that you talk about here, and with that, so talk to me about like how you moved from linguist to special warfare to now being an author. Talk to me about that, man.
Sure. So when I was working as a linguist in Hawaii, I screened for the program, and they could use you for your language skills, but they really needed you for your cryptology skills. And so I screened for this program, and you had to do the same like physical screening test as the SEALs do. You don't go to BUDS or anything like that, but you have a different screening process. But by way of numbers, just so people understand, there were about 11,000 cryptologists in the Navy, and that constitutes about the top 3%. And I say top 3%, I'm talking like ASVAB scores. The only community with higher ASVAB scores than the cryptologists are the nuclear technicians. So it's a very difficult community to get into from a technical standpoint. The attrition rate of my school was about 60%. So we lost well beyond half of the students that we had to go through the school. And then from there, of those 11,000 that are total cryptologists in the Navy, there are about maybe 500 or 600 that screen to get into the special operations community. And of individuals that did the job I did, there were only about 100 of us total. And so it was a very small group of people, but we were very critical. I won't go into the specifics of what we did and how we did it. That's not necessary, but it was a very exciting thing to be able to take some of those skill sets and employ them in the war on terror and beyond since then. So I wanted to take some of the things that I learned with that, as well as the job that I had for the past 6 years, and put that in the story.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, that comes out, man. It's fun. It's fun to learn a little bit more about you through Voodoo and the rest of the characters in the book. I mean, I know it's fiction, so it's, you know, loosely based on life and stuff, and everything's cleared through DOD. So
Yeah.
if NSA is listening, and we know they probably are, right? There's nothing to see here.
Yeah.
Move along. Go worry about something else. But yeah, so let's talk about this story, Jim. Really, really powerful story, right? Nightmares and AI and Japan. And before we start there, one of your characters' last name is Shimoda, and I'm just curious. Is that Donald Shimoda from Richard Bach's Illusions, or was that just someone that you encountered as a last name that you found was common? Did you ever read that book?
No, I didn't. So actually,
that's
which
okay.
Which is funny. A friend of mine the other day was hitting me up about the fact that there was a guy that we worked with, last name is Shimoda, and he was like, but it actually, I was thinking more, it's on my wife's family side of she actually has Shimoda as a family name, but it's also a very common name in Japan. But the character also that I had in the story, a lot of people don't realize it, but a lot of names in Japan are regionally associated. So different prefectures, you can find the origin of the family names. Like I remember one area I lived in, everyone was named Mori, M-O-R-I, just everyone. So Shimoda is another one of those names that is different regionally associated in Japan. So I wanted it to be consistent with how I portrayed the character in the story. So I came up with the names that were consistent with the areas in which the individuals were from.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's powerful, man. That's a detail that I bet, you know, if as you get more readers, as Japanese readers read it, they'll be like, oh, I would say that's great respect, right?
Yeah. Well, what I wanted to do, I wanted to put things in the story that you couldn't find on Wikipedia. So there are certain phrases that I use in the book a lot. My favorite, one of them is that I heard in Japan all the time was "goen garu," right? "Goen garu" means like there's fate. And it's another way of saying like, oh, that's lucky, you know, oh, good thing this happened. But usually it's on the opposite end that people say it, "goen ga nai," meaning there's no fate. That's another way of saying no thank you. Like, there's no fate with this. Yeah, "goen ga nai." But I took that term and I twisted it in the story because I mess with fate in the story a lot when it comes to predictability. And that goes back into the aspect of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So one thing that in this book is, aside from a few things in the story, when you're reading it, you're like, a lot of this is science fiction. A lot of it's not, most of it's not science fiction. The vast majority of the things that I mentioned in the book are all real. It's just, I put them in a context in which the average person, one, is expecting, but two, one, that they won't really experience it in the way that it comes across in the story, because one, it's usually different communities like the special operations community and some other ones are getting access to some of these things and manipulating them in useful ways. At the same time, there's commercial areas that are using these technologies and science and different type of scientific research that is and probably in the next 10 to 15 years is going to dramatically change the way that we interface with these systems, right? And so I wanted to put that in a story and in a concept that made sense. While exploring, but at the same time, I had a problem. What I wanted to do is I wanted to explore the psychology of the character. And so the book, you got to realize, is a vehicle for exploring characters. And so sometimes people will fixate and say, well, this book is a book about technology. No, it's a book about people using technology and how that technology is impacting their lives. And so there's a lot packed in there. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, no, it's super deep, man. There's a lot of twists and turns and a lot of surprises inside. So take us take us inside the mind of Voodoo here. Your kind of your main character and how 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 Voodoo thinks.
So one thing that's unique, I think, about Voodoo that I like a lot about this character is Voodoo obviously has demons. He has things that have mistakes he's made, elements in his life that he has to live with. But he deals with it in a way that is a little bit uncharacteristic of somebody in this position. So for example, he does have post-traumatic stress, and he relives nightmares of things that have happened. But his problem, Voodoo's biggest issue, is that he not only does he not deal with these problems, he deals with it in a way personally, like in the sense to where when he doesn't deal with it, I mean, he doesn't go to therapy and he doesn't discuss it with anyone. He just thinks he can muscle through it. And the whole time he's just pushing through. And most times in stories, you'll see characters where they turn to alcohol or they turn to some kind of substance abuse. And Voodoo doesn't do that. Voodoo defaults to burying himself in his work. He wants to forget not just about what's going on around him, but he thinks that, like I said, if he can muscle through it, he'll forget and he'll move on. And his body and his mind will move on. But it doesn't. And he just ends up not sleeping. And he's in this perpetual state where he wants to sleep, but he can't. But he wants to be awake, but he's tired. And so he's hoping that the next adrenaline push for his job will keep him in a state where he can avoid the inevitable pain that's coming in his nightmares. And so that's kind of the issue that he has to deal with. Is he eventually gets to the point where the nightmares is actually exactly where he needs to go in order to find the solution. And so he has to face this demon that's just waiting there. But it's not. It doesn't come about in a way that you would ever expect. It's not like he's going to go into some therapy session where all of a sudden I have him on a bed. That's not going to happen, right?
No, it's all action, which is super cool, man. That's super cool. So Jim, is how much of this kind of God algorithm here is stuff that's in here, and how much of that is actually real? Like, how much of that did you come up with versus how much of that is actually in play right now?
It depends. So the God algorithm itself, conceptually, there's pieces of it that exist, but not in the way that in the story it manifests itself. Like there are parts in there that when person's reading, they'd be like, yeah, that's fiction. But when I talk about machine learning algorithms and predictability and the way that you create machine learning, how machine learning algorithms are used to create what's called a model, and how those models that are based on statistics create predictable outcomes, all of that's basically real. And so, for example, so there's a couple of things that led to me writing this story. One was, the first was in 2018, I found a small mass on my back, and I went to the dermatologist and they did a punch biopsy, and I got diagnosed with stage 1B melanoma. And they had to take a big chunk of skin out of my back and part of my lymph node. And I had this, I wouldn't necessarily call it an existential crisis, but I had a kind of a moment where I realized that I had to come to terms with my own mortality and recognize that, I'm not immortal. I know that when I was younger and I thought potentially dying in combat was going to be a thing, and I've moved past that. Now I'm at a point where I have children and I have this life, and if I died, how would they know me? And so I really had that in the back of my mind for about a good year, until I attended this symposium at Caltech, and this professor, her name was Viviana Gradinaru, and she leads the Gradinaru lab, and she was talking about something called optogenetics. And optogenetics is a way of using proteins injected into the bloodstream, into the brain, to interact with synaptic activity in the brain. They were using it really to treat people like with Parkinson's. But what's cool about it is when they put in these photoreceptive opsins, like these sometimes referred to as optogenetic opsins, into the brain, they hit it with light on the outside. And certain frequencies of light cause those opsins to move and to interact with the synaptic connections in a unique way that literally changes the way that your brain activity takes place. And so while I was watching that, listening to her tell that story, the plot for this book just popped in my head. And that was when it was like, that's what you need to write. And so I went home that same day and I just started writing. I'd never written a book before, never intended to be a writer, but I just started cranking away. I started researching everything I could about proper form structure for a book, how to write a book, what books, and then for about good 2 years, I just cranked away on it. It took me 6 months for the first draft. And then I had professional editing done, and I worked with a lot of professional writers to get it to the point where it is right now in the form factor to where it could be readable.
Wow, man.
Right.
That's
So,
fantastic. Wow.
yeah.
That's a very unique kind of writer's origin story. So have you read did you read Stephen King's On Writing or Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird, or did you really just get started?
So I did a lot of that. I listened to a lot of the master classes from like David Baldacci and Dan Brown. Took a lot of good notes from the how they write and just follow their formula, and then realizing where I want to be in that space and how I'm different and how the writing style that I write. In certain aspects, I have a little bit more of a poetic element to the way that I write that's different from the traditional thriller because I wanted to have more of a meaning. I also write in what's called a deep point of view, where you're not, so like Tom Clancy, for example, he's a lot of tell and not show. I want you to be like in the mind of the character going through all these different elements. I want you to be living it. And I have to do that if you're going to be in his dreams. And so I really want to dig in that way. The other element of the story that I want to dig into is actually related to not just my job as a cryptologist, but what I did for the past 6 years, where I was the head of innovation for the headquarters of Naval Special Warfare, which is, for those who aren't unfamiliar with Naval Special Warfare, that's the headquarters, that's the SEAL teams. But it's not just the SEAL teams, it's everybody that's in the special operations community for the Navy. So I was in charge of innovation for that. So my job was to identify emerging technologies and new things that people weren't considering from a capability standpoint. So new technologies that could change the way that we do warfare. And that's all I did, is I just chased new stuff coming out and figure out ways to employ it. And so some of the stuff that I wasn't able to do in real life, I was like, that would be a good story. I had it in the back of my mind. And so some of those things, and some of the stuff some of the stuff isn't going to be in a book because it's real and I won't put it there. But other stuff, it's pretty close. It's good stuff. It's fun.
Wow. That's cool, man. That's cool. So, well, you just retired from the Navy, man. So you're going to go on a book tour, or what's the plan, Jim?
So I will actually visit a couple cities. I'm going to visit my hometown in Albuquerque. I might do one in Utah. I was going to go up to Monterey as well, to the Defense Language Institute. And then I have on June 4th is the release party for the book and my retirement party here in San Diego.
That's awesome, man. That's really cool. So, well, knowing you, right? I know you got 2 more inside you and then 1 other novel. Is that do I remember that right?
So as of right now, yes, I have the sequel. Not to say that will be the end of the series, but I definitely have. I'm writing the sequel to this book right now, and then I have a standalone that I'm on the side. But that book had a lot to do with Russia, and the recent current events have completely changed my plot. So I needed to. I put that one on the back burner. That was going to be one. It was called The Devil and the Pendulum, and it was about, it's like the Screw Tape letters, but instead of it being about Uncle Screwtape and demons learning to tempt man, it's a book about Russian agents learning how to manipulate Americans. But
that's too close to home, Jim. I mean, that's really happening. So let's not talk about that.
That was me processing 2020. Is what that book was, right?
Yeah.
So,
right.
Yeah, it was just me thinking through all the potential. I mean, as somebody who's been in the intelligence community for a long time, you look at the problem in a unique way, and you see things differently. And I was like, well, what would I do in this situation? And then that's when I started writing, and then I was like, this is a little scary. This feels too real. Yeah.
That's cool, man. That's really cool. So good, man. So cool. So you got a few places people can connect with you. I know they can get a copy of the Hawk Enigma at jailhancock.com. But if there's one thing that maybe you want to inspire people with about the book, or about life even, what would that be, Jim? Give us some last bit of advice or insight, or just something, man, that we can kind of sink our teeth into and get started today.
So I think the big thing to take out of this book is that regardless of what issue you're running into in life, you don't have to go through it alone. And sometimes we begin to think that, yes, we're strong enough and we need to be taking care of other people, but there's nothing in life that requires you to completely suffer a burden by yourself. And I want to, that's probably the biggest takeaway you can get from this book, is that it's a journey, right?
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Well, we're not alone, and we can learn more about Voodoo and Jail Hancock here in the book, The Hawk Enigma. Pick it up. It's at jailhancock.com. It's fantastic. It's an easy read, and yet it's a hard read, Jim. And by that, man, it's like fun to read, and it's like, dude, that's really deep, to your point. So I really dug it, man. Congratulations, and I can't wait to read the next one.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Appreciate the time.